He has an identical twin, but for some reason insists there's no one like him. He's also a dad, a son, and a friend. He claims to have never turned down Guinness. So keep that in mind, they do have Guinness downstairs. He can talk his and your head off about sports and movies, so if that's somehow your idea of a good time, let him know. He's told stories at Do Not Submit, This Much Is True, Is This a Thing, First Person Live, All Skate, and many other local storytelling events. His stories range from tales about family and friends, jobs, dating, food, travel, and the decline and possible survival of the US of A, to tough yet hopeful personal health stuff, and lots more. Please give a warm welcome to Dan Barrett.
Thank you. This is a story for anybody out there who's ever 23 years old. I think you know who you are. I was 23 and I just graduated from the University of Illinois. So had my friend John Russell. And we decided we were going to travel around the country, from Baltimore, where his mom lived, to San Francisco. Here is how we planned the trip. John bought a 1971 Vista Cruiser station wagon for $100. I wasn't sure if it would make it downhill. We didn't have any money. We didn't know where we were going to stay. It turned out, January 1985, this was one of the coldest winters ever. And we had a gift for getting on each other's nerves. So before the trip, I went to Champaign to say goodbye to a few good friends, and I was at a party, and this woman came up to me. She knew who I was, she knew John, and she looked very stressed, and she said, "This trip is a mistake. Don't go on this trip." I said, "Yeah, you're right." But making sense was not high on my list of priorities. So the next day I left for Baltimore, and I met John. And the very first day of the trip, we proved all the critics wrong. We had the greatest thing that can happen on a road trip on the first day. The car started. And we pulled out of John's mom's driveway and high-fived each other and said, "This is going to be great." And of course, another ritual, you had to play the first song of the trip. We agreed it would be "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Rolling Stones.
Okay.
We drove for 10 miles and then had a discussion about what the second song of the trip would be. And it was "Sympathy for the Devil" by the Stones. Washington, D.C., North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. John and I developed a strategy for where we were going to stay. We decided we would drive, and when we were tired, we'd pull over into a ditch. I want you to know there are a lot of great ditches in this country. A lot of them. Sometimes, though, we'd stop at a college campus, and John would take out his guitar. He was kind of charming, I guess, kind of funny, and we'd play. And once in South Carolina, a woman came up to us and said, "Where do you boys stay when you're traveling around like this?" I said, "Well, we find a ditch." And she looked at me and said, "Oh, we can't let you do that. You can sleep on our floor." So that worked a few times. We also were very careful about having a balanced diet. We were. We had both chunky peanut butter and creamy peanut butter. Yeah. Anyway, we're driving in Georgia, and all of a sudden we shifted gears and decided, let's go to a foreign country. So we did. Florida. The next part I'm a little ashamed about, a little sleazy, unethical, immoral. We went to Disney World. But before we went to Disney World, we did something we thought would be age appropriate. We got really stoned. And we go into the park and get on a lift that was kind of taking people from ride to ride. It was about 50 or 60 feet above the ground. I have a fear of heights. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that opposite of where we were sitting, there was a family of 5. And the kids were like 8, 6, and 3 years old. And this family was screaming and whining and complaining. And it was traumatic for us. And we got off of this lift and said, we got to get out of this place right now. So we get to our car and I just turned to John and I said, I'm never having kids. John turned to me and said, me neither. We should go to a vasectomy clinic. But we didn't. We just kept driving. We drove 7 hours south, me and John and Mick and Keith, you know. And we get to the end of Key West. And I gotta tell you, there were a couple hundred people there. It was near sunset, and it was the most amazing thing. I'm colorblind, but we watched the sunset, and it was yellow and orange and blue and red and purple, a flash of green. I turned to John and said, this is much better than Disney World. And then we left, and we had to be responsible adults, so we found another ditch. We drove up north, and then we went through Alabama and Mississippi, and we got to New Orleans. And we had kind of an epiphany there. We didn't spend that much money on the trip, but we spent about $5 each on a beer and a bowl of beans and rice in this dive in New Orleans. And I swear, we looked at each other and said, we could move down here and go to this restaurant every single day. We didn't. We kept going. You know, like Texas, New Mexico. I don't want to talk about Texas, okay? Is that good object? Not tonight. So, anyway, we're driving, and it was not yet true. It was not true anymore that John and I were getting on each other's nerves. We were embedded on each other's nerves. And John was testing out one of his songs. He was playing his guitar, and it was about a man who loved a woman, and they broke up, and then the guy went fishing and got drunk, and he recovered, and he went back to this woman. I don't know. But he played it like 10 times. And I said, John, if you play this song again, I'm going to throw your guitar out the window. I didn't. Then John would wonder about what I was doing, because one morning I was playing a lot of songs by the Doors. John said, this is all you're playing. It's depressing. Stop playing the Doors. And I said to him, John, you just don't appreciate classical music. So we kept going, and I realized at one point that John and I were kind of becoming like brothers. We had each other's backs. We made each other laugh. We annoyed each other, but didn't threaten to kill each other. We kept driving. And John wanted to stop at every 7-Eleven we passed in the country so he could call his girlfriend. He was almost mortally wounded by Cupid's arrow. But it was two things. One, he really loved his girlfriend. He really did. And the other was, he got a finance degree from the University of Illinois, so he had learned that he should call her collect every time. He gets back in the car after, 2 hours on the phone. And I'm like, John, just marry her, okay? But let's get to California first. So we keep going. And we get to the Grand Canyon. And we're sitting there, and I looked at John and I said, this is one hell of a ditch. And we kept going, and all of a sudden we're near California, me and John and Mick and Keith. And this time we wanted to play around a little bit with some of the tourist stuff, okay? Even though I was still getting over the Disney experience. And we went to the San Diego Zoo and saw the monkeys, and we went up to Los Angeles and Beverly Hills and the mansions and the rich people. And I gotta say, the monkeys in the San Diego Zoo and the rich people in Beverly Hills, I couldn't tell the difference. So we drove up north. Last part of the trip. And to the left is the Pacific Ocean. It was breathtaking, beautiful. We get up to San Francisco. The Vista Cruiser had been battered by then. And my Aunt Betty was there, and we had dinner with her, and she took a picture of us in front of the Vista Cruiser. And then the next day, John took the car and left and went to go see his girlfriend in Champaign, drove that way across the country. I spent a few weeks in San Francisco, got a few more free meals from my aunt. And the years passed. And John and I played football for a while, each other, and marriages and kids and houses and careers and peanut butter. And John moved to Nashville with his family, cut a couple of albums, and we kind of lost touch. And then it was the pandemic, it was 2020, and I had just gotten divorced. And a few months later, I met this woman, and the first date we had, she told me she had met John 40 years earlier, and her brother was in a band with John. I was like, what are the chances? About a week later, I got a call from a friend of John's who I knew, and he told me that John was in the hospice, and he died 2 days later. I didn't have words for that, and I don't have words for that. But almost by instinct, I found my way to the storage area in my apartment, where I hadn't checked it out in over a year. And I was looking for some artifact of that trip. And I'm going through boxes and wiping away dirt, and it was damp down there for a long time, for an hour. And there it was. There was that picture that my Aunt Betty had taken. It was in a plastic frame, and I wiped away the dirt. And that car was damaged far worse than I ever remember. But there were me and John in the sunshine with our ripped shirts and sweatshirts and ripped jeans. But we had made the trip. We had done it. And we were just standing there smiling, grinning from ear to ear. Thank you.